Hello, welcome along again. Tuesday evening, good to see you all. Glad to have you joining in whenever you join in, whether you join in now or whether you join in later. Welcome along. I've just been let know that I'm on. That's good. Let me turn that off. There we go. Won't get bothered. So, welcome. As always, we recognise that we are gathered and meet as Southside on land that God created. And particularly for us, it's being cared for by the Yagara and the Turrbal people. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and we pray for conciliation between us and them, and reconciliation between all people and God. So hopefully my title has caught your attention. Doing time with young people. So we were exploring Andrew Root's book, The End of Youth Ministry, Why Parents Don't Think It's Important Anymore and what youth workers should do about it. So in that, he has explored that sense of a lot of our focus for parents is on about how are we building our young people's identity, how are we helping them to find their thing. And so that's the focus for parents. Then what part does youth ministry play in that? And the former things that we focused on in youth ministry probably don't really affect too much. So we were on about, or seem to be on about, things about slowing young people down, helping them not to make those adult decisions till later. Don't get into drinking too early, don't get into sex too early and all those sorts of things. But the research shows us that that's no longer a problem. Young people have slowed down, they're making those decisions much later, and parents are slowing them down. And so if that's our role, we no longer have that role. And so Andrew Root has explored and suggested that our focus is more about, needs to be, how are we allowing young people to share stories, share who they are, to be seen, to be known, to be accepted as they are. And that sense of that place sharing. In a number of Andrew Root's books, he really comes down to that term, and he's got a lovely German term for it that I think it's Bonhoeffer uses, but we'll just call it place sharing, that sense of where you are present with young people, where you actually share that place with them. To some degree, how are you being Christ to them, but also how are you experiencing Christ from them? That how do you spend time, how do you do time with them? And so that's where the title for today comes from. That sense of how are we doing time with our young people, and how is what we do deliberately focusing on that so that we get those chances to have time. And I guess it's interesting, we've just come through Southside's garage sale, so at Mount Gravatt, and it's that chance to, for me, it's that chance to get in there and serve with others, so that you're serving alongside young people and older people and getting in there. And as you serve, you start to hear stories and to connect. As you're sitting there doing something with someone else, setting up, you'll chat with them. Packing up, you'll have conversations with them. And sometimes that gets to be really real. So I had an interesting, conversation with one person about some fairly deep issues that they were going through, and that was great. Others just having fun chatting. Particularly, we were having a great time, all those of us who were down packing up after the clothing section afterwards, and just sharing what that means, and getting in and grabbing things and making silly comments. And it's as you do that, you become real. That's how are we finding those chances? Garage sale, awesome opportunity. Getting in there, sharing that time. Evening service was good. A couple of weeks ago, we had a few of our teenagers come along. Yay, finally. And two of the boys sitting on a table. So I deliberately went and sat with them, because it's, as you sit there and yes, share the discussion topics that we had, which was good. So exploring the Bible passage that's gone out of my brain. Wasn't Lazarus and the rich man. It was the one before that. The Lost, Parables of the Lost. Oh, Rod, you're here at last. Excellent. Sorry, that's a joke from the garage sale. I got there just after 6, and then several times during the day, Rod would walk past and go, "Oh, you're here, Richard." Particularly if someone new had just turned up, and it's like, "Yes, thank you, Rod." So good to see you, Rod. Glad you made it. So at the evening service. So now, Rod, you can work out how long it changes between when you message and when I answer. So at the evening service, sitting there and chatting with those two boys, and yes, talking through the parable of, I think we chose the lost coin and what that meant, but also just as you sit and chat over dinner. And again, those meals are important because, you break down the barriers when you eat together. That sense you're willing to share things that you might not otherwise either do or just get the chance to do. You're eating, there's an openness to talk about anything. It's not structured in, we've just read this reading, what does it mean for you? But you can talk about, well, what's going on? What have you been doing this week? What are you doing next week? And those sort of opportunities come up. And so that chance to sit and share with others. So how do we find those spaces? Which reminds me, someone was talking about, that's right, we're in church on Sunday. And Jock said, how do you start a conversation with someone? Someone had a really good answer, which has now instantly gone out of my head. But it was along the lines of, what did you do? What did you do yesterday? What are you doing today? Something that really draws into, starting to get to know hobbies and things like that. But yeah, how do you start to dig into those questions of, who are you? And what does it mean to be? What is your essence? And so, drawing on, and I talked about on Sunday night, Mark Iaconelli, in some of his talks and his work, talks about, how are we present with people? How are people seen? That church should be the place where people are seen. I go there and I know I will be seen. I'm not just, I saw you, I ticked you off my list here, you're here, but I see you in a way that is meaningful. I see you in a way that I share. So for Andrew Root, that place sharing. For Mark Iaconelli, that sense of sharing. He wrote a book, Contemplative Youth Ministry, which might be behind me. No, it isn't. But talked about not necessarily just being silent and going around and meditating, but that sense of connecting with the young people, connecting with one another. The great story, I don't think I've shared this story, but the story that I always love, he tells, and that demonstrates this place sharing. He was Christmas shopping one year at a big shopping centre. Last minute, as all good men do. And he was sitting having lunch in the food court, and he noticed these people, this group of people come in. Special needs people, I'm trying to think of the politically correct term these days. A group of special needs people and their carers come in. And he knows one big guy come in, and he was holding this, McDonald's voucher, free coffee with McDonald's. And goes over and gets his coffee, and all is well. And Mark Iaconelli says he finished his lunch, didn't think much of it, and then finished his shopping, and he goes out and there's this torrential downpour. And so he and a whole heap of people are sort of standing under the awning waiting for this torrential downpour to come. And as they're standing there, this group of special needs people comes out, and their bus, the minivan, pulls out the front, and the carers are starting to try and get them on the bus. And this big guy is there with his cup of coffee. And he steps out, and as he goes, he trips over and drops the coffee all over him. Or no, he drops the coffee, and then he just falls down in a heap. I've just lost my coffee. It was a free coffee, and oh. And he just sits there in the rain with the coffee smearing all over him, sort of thing. And Mark Iaconelli says, his carer says, to the other carers, look, get the others on the bus. And she sits down in that coffee and the mess and the rain, and she hugs him. And when he's ready, she picks him up, gets him on the bus, and they go off. And Mark Iaconelli says, I was just in tears, because that is the image of God. That is how God cares for us. And that is how we are to care for. And again, this isn't just for our young people. You know, anyone in the church could watch this, and this stuff all applies to everyone. How are we spending that time with everyone, not just our young people? How do we sit in the mess with them and go, yeah, life's messy for you at the moment. Let me sit here. I don't care that I'm getting poured on. That's all right. I'll just enjoy your company. That's why things like Boys Brigade have those great chances of those expedition type stuff. It's when you're walking through the bush with your leader and you're with them for, 2 days, things are going to get real. And it's like I've heard people talk about in one of his letters, Peter talks about, I was with Christ and he never sinned. And you go, well, here's Peter. He spent 3 years of his life with Jesus, pretty much 24/7. They went off a bit. He would have seen if Jesus had sinned. Like, you can pull off an hour a day. So, ministers can look nice and holy. We do it. You see us an hour a week. Aren't we great? We can probably behave for that hour. We could do 2. We can do 3. But if you're with us for the whole time of the week, if you're with us like those Boys Brigade leaders for 2 whole days, the mask is going to come down at various stages and you're going to see the real us. And that's when life gets real, and that's when real conversations can happen. When you go, hey, life isn't wonderful. Let me share what I'm going through. Let me share what you're going through. Let's sit in that mud, muck and the coffee together and think about it. So that's our real challenge, I think. How do we share those moments? And they're not always scripted, they're not always known. The other story I really love from Mark Iaconelli that demonstrates this a bit, that it's not about the words that we have. He tells this story that once he was chatting with some friends and they were talking about role plays. And he thought, role play? That's awesome. We're going to do that at youth group tonight. Because that's what youth workers do. We hear a good idea and go, we're going to do that today. No, don't worry that you need lots of training to think these through. We'll jump in, we'll do it now. So he gets to youth group and he's got the kids down here and he sets up sort of on the stage area a table with 2 chairs. That's going to be their lunchroom at school. And he says, we're going to have 2 people come out. And one person is going to be a Christian and another person is going to be just someone who doesn't believe. And the Christian's going to share their faith with the other person, and the other person can share. And so volunteers, and he says, the girl who's most going to get him to heaven, she's the one that's switched on, and when he gets to heaven, he's going to say, she was in my group. That's why I should get into heaven, because at least one person was with it. She goes up to be the Christian. And another boy, I forget his name, goes up to be the non-Christian. And so they sit down at the table, and the good Christian girl says, oh, well, you should believe in Jesus because, it's in the Bible and you should believe the Bible. And the non-Christian actor says, well, what if I don't believe the Bible? What if I don't believe in God? It's just not true. And at which point the Christian girl raises her hand, and they agreed that, if you get into trouble, you could raise your hand and someone will relieve you. So she raises her hand and sort of gets out of there. And he says, one boy, again, I forget his name, but let's call him Troy. It's not the name he uses. Walks up. And Troy has, basically, he's at youth group because he's looking for girls. He's openly said that to Mark Iaconelli. He's just come back from one of those outward bound type things where he's got in trouble with the law and then sent him off bush for 2 weeks to look after himself and to, do all those sorts of things. And so he goes up to take the place of the Christian, and Mark Iaconelli just thinks, I am going to be sacked. This is not going to end up well. This is all going badly. Oh no, there's another person. Maybe. I think they switch. Another person comes in and gets blown out of the water and like, no, I could help. Anyway, Troy comes up. And he sits down. Yeah, there's another person who come up and said, okay, if you don't believe the Bible, God is good. And the non-Christian guy goes, how can you say God is good? When I was a kid, I was with my friend and this guy drive-by shooting and they shot him and I sat there and held him as he died. At which point the second person puts their hand out and Mark realises this is no longer a role play. And so Troy comes up and he sits down and Mark Iaconelli goes, I'm going to be fired. He's going to just sit there and go, yes, you're right. There is no God. It's all a lie. He thinks this is going to go terribly. And Troy just sits there. And the guy looks at him. And he says, well, how can you believe this? How can you accept this God who obviously, didn't care about me, didn't care about my friend Sam, or whatever his name was. And Troy just sits there silently. And slowly the other guy who's playing the non-Christian settles down. And then Troy goes over, hugs him, picks him up, and walks him back into the group. And again, that's our image. How do we be present with our young people? How do we be present with other people? And stop and hear their stories. To hear them and to walk alongside them. To sit there in the mess with them. To have those opportunities. Don't know if I've ever told these stories. But a number of years ago now, well over 10, probably 15 years ago now. Wow. So as I've probably said, I enjoy chatting with people online and getting to know people from all around the world. And so there was a young guy, I think he was about 14 at the time, 13, 14, that I was chatting with on a sort of regular basis for a little while. Always really upbeat, happy, happy-go-lucky guy called T. And then one day we're sitting chatting, talking about brothers, and then he says, look, I just want to let you know, I'm going to kill myself. So I'll keep chatting till you're gone, and then, we won't chat again. And I'm sitting there, what on earth? What does heart? And so started to talk through, well, why would you want to kill yourself? And he really loved gymnastics. And so he realised that his mum who was a single mum. A number of kids couldn't afford his gymnastics. And his dream was doing gymnastics and going to the Olympics. And he thought, if I can't do my gymnastics, I'm just going to be so miserable I would want to die. And that would just make mum and dad sad. And so if I just kill myself now, mum's not going to have to worry about me being sad and not being able to do the gymnastics. So we talked through options about, well, how could he raise the money to do that? Eventually, we sent him the money to do that. But we talked through that. It's only as you sit and share and sit in the mess that you discover these things. It's only as you take the opportunities to sit and share time, do time together, that you discover these things. If we're busy racing along, we don't get it. How do we stop? How do we ask the question, how are you, and mean it? And when someone says the good answer, get them to unpack it. I was going into church at one of our churches a couple of weeks ago, and having to start walking in with someone else, and I said, "Hi, how are you?" And they go, "Oh, all right." I said, "Well, that doesn't sound too positive." They said, "Oh, well, one of their siblings had just passed away." I said, "Oh, that's no good, Something like, was it sudden or whatever?" And they said, "Oh, well, we think they did it." And it's like, it would have been easy to go, "How are you?" "Oh, okay." Just keep walking and never have found out that information. But how do we dig deeper so we actually get people's story? How do we move past the superficial? And I guess I've always been challenged by, there was a guy at our college who, was known, and I can't remember, he passed away while he was at college. And I can't remember whether it was said while he was alive or after he passed away, after he died. That sense of me, he would always be that that sort of person who would ask you, how are you, and wait till you gave a real honest answer. And so I was trying to keep that in the back of mind. How do we do that? How do I do that? How is my how are you more than just how are you, please say good, because then I can move on to the next question. How do I sit there and do time with you and find out how you are and unpack that and discover it? And how do we do that with our young people? How do we do that with all the people we interact with? So there's our challenge for this week. How are we doing time? How are we finding those opportunities? You know, how do we find those spaces like garage sale, like evening service? And yeah, it's not just we put on a program so we're with the young people, but how are we finding those time where young people are there? So it might just be morning tea at church. How do I deliberately find space to go up to young people and find out who they are? Yes, they're probably wanting to go and play a game, but if I stop and ask them, they'll actually want to talk to me. Because believe it or not, young people are looking for older people to build connections with. They're not just sitting there going, oh, all the old people are boring. And that's our perception. They're actually wanting to build connections. So how do we find those spaces? At church, at the activities that go on in your neighbourhood, at brigades, at youth group. There's plenty of times. At young families' picnics, whatever. There's plenty of times when we are around young people. There's plenty of times when we're around other people, and we can stop and spend time with them and find out who they are and find out where they are so that we can support them in whatever's going on. That will be the most effective ministry that we can do. You know, sure, I've said it before here, say it to young people all the time. The most important gift that you can give to someone is your time. So we don't need to be expert counsellors. You know, if that young person I was talking with online had been someone in Australia in my own church, I would have been taking them along to a counsellor to get them professional help, because I'm not gifted to do that. I encourage them, go and get some professional help, go and talk to a counsellor, go and talk to your school counsellor, sort of thing. But how do we do that? How do we spend time? How do we share time? And how do we open those doors so that we can have those conversations with young people and with anyone? It's about finding those chances to spend time. It's about finding those, being deliberate about finding out how they are. You know, how are you? And then asking follow-up questions really is not that difficult. You know, how are you good? Well, what makes you good? Why has your week been good? What have you done today that was good? And then you'll get a bit of their story and we'll unpack that more. You know, why was school good? You know, walk home with Oliver on Monday. How was school good? Well, what made it good? Or what was it? What did you do at playtime? Oh, you did this and this and this. Oh, yes. And why was that good to do that? Oh, what we're going to, you know. It's not rocket science. Just asking people. And it's about that drawing out story. It's also about being vulnerable enough to share our deep story and our concerns and our worries. And to go, hey, this is where I'm at too. Life's not rosy for me. Let me share my struggles. Yeah. So there's some thoughts for you. We might be early, Rod. You can get off to Bible study early. But yeah, again, not rocket science. We've probably talked about it before, but I guess that wraps up the stuff about Andrew Root's book. That sense of how we being place sharers, how we making sure that our ministry with young people is walking alongside them and allowing them that space to be who they are and to share who they are and for us to discover who they are. To just walk alongside, to be open and honest with them about who we are, to dwell with them, to love them in that way where we will do anything for their good. And so, there's your thought. Find a young person this week and ask them how they are. Don't give up until you get a really deep or really confident answer. Don't settle for good. In fact, tomorrow, everyone you see, ask, how are you? And get a decent answer. There you go. Homework. Oh, no one said if I turned in I got homework. That's really bad. I'm going to be quiet because I'm now rambling. hope you enjoyed it. Please pop some questions in the question box, or text me or email me, so I can think of something to talk about next week. Otherwise, I will just ramble again. But thanks for tuning in. If you're tuning in live, thanks for having us. If you're tuning in later, that's great. They're here on Facebook or over on YouTube. So we pop it over on there when I remember. I don't think I put last week's up. I'll have to have a look. I definitely downloaded it from Facebook to put up on YouTube. Thanks for joining us. God bless you. And if you ever want to talk about how you're doing, please have a chat too. That would be great. But see you again next week. Bye.